Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 6 common types of internal control activities. Let's take a look. First up, establishment of responsibility and segregation of duties. These are two of the most important internal controls you've got. They're also two of the hardest to keep separate from one another, for students to really understand, wait, what is one and what is the other when they get examples of internal control activities. So I like to put these together on the same slide because this way I can talk about what makes each one unique and even give you an example of what separates one from the other. So I'm going to start off with establishment of responsibility. Establishment of responsibility is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to establish who is responsible for doing something. Now, what do those somethings involve? Well, they typically involve authorizing or approving transactions in some way, okay? And so if you think about this is a real relatable thing. Think about a worker at a cash register. You can put this in a retail environment, in a fast food environment, whatever you're most familiar with, but think of a retail worker at a cash register. Um, the cash register is typically protected in some way. It could be that the retail worker has to put in some sort of unique employee code to get it to run, or they have to swipe their employee ID badge to get it to run. But basically, no one can go and start typing things into that register other than the employee if the system is set up properly. So the employee is responsible for the transactions that occur in that cash register. The employee is also responsible for the cash that enters that register, right? And so this is what's called establishing responsibility. So it has to do with authorizing and approving transactions. And as I just mentioned with like the cash register not responding if not given the proper codes or the proper ID badge swiped, it involves limiting access to authorized personnel and logging that access with user specific identifiers and passwords. So the register is actually keeping a record of who logged in, what code was typed, what ID card was swiped. And if you aren't the right person, it's not going to let you in, okay? This should be limited to one person per control. And here's where I'm going to give you a little bit of visual, and this is going to relate back to the example I was just giving. So feel free to laugh at my drawing skills here, but this box is my cash register. So there's all the keys and there's the screen. All right, so there's my cash register. And establishment of responsibility says, hey, on this cash register, only one person should be able to access it. And the reason is this. Imagine, let's do the alternative, that 4 people were able to access that register, okay? Now, let's say money goes missing out of that register. Who do you blame? Do you blame person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4? Any person you blame for making that money disappear is going to just point to the other 3 and say, well, how do you know they didn't do it? There's no establishment of who's responsible if you've got 4 people with access to this one activity. However, as long as you establish that one person is responsible for this activity, that one person knows that they're on the hook, that one person feels a sense of responsibility to prevent, say, cash from magically growing legs and walking away. All right, that's establishment of responsibility. Take some activity that is there for the protection of assets, that is there for the protection of entering transactions properly, establish that one person should do it. That's it. Okay. That brings us to segregation of duties, which is very similar and yet extremely different at the same time. Segregation of duties says different individuals should be responsible for related activities. And when I say related activities, what I am really saying is activities that, when combined, they provide a fraud opportunity. Okay? So, what, when combined, provides a fraud opportunity? Well, look at my second bullet here. Responsibility for asset record keeping and physical custody. If a single person can both record transactions and take physical custody of the asset involved in the transaction, that person could theoretically defraud the company. So again, let's do let's say in this case we have our I'm going to move that drawing. Let's say we have here our cash ledger. All right, so there's our accounting system. There's our cash ledger. And then let's say we have, I'm going to make a little money bag for this. We have our bank deposit. All right, so there's two things that go on with the company. You have to record cash in and out, and you have to make deposits to the bank. If the same person does both of these activities, there is nothing stopping that person from simply leaving a transaction out of the cash ledger and leaving that same amount of money out of the bank deposit. That person could simply take that money and put it in their own pocket, right? That's a problem. The duties that, when combined, enable a fraud opportunity are not being kept separate from one another. So how do you combat this? Well, you don't let one person do both of those things. You make separate people do it. Now you've got one person keeping the record, one person handling the physical cash, and since the same person doesn't have access to both, the only way for this to create a fraud opportunity would be for these two people to work together. And that is typically a high hurdle when it comes to illegal actions, getting two people to essentially collude to commit an illegal activity. So there's your difference. Segregation of duties separates record keeping and physical custody such that fraud is not possible by a single person. Establishment of responsibility says only one person can do any particular activity such that you have responsibility that thing will be done right, and that you can't just look at a group of people and say, well, who was responsible, and they all point fingers at each other. That's the difference between the two. Very similar, yet very different, both extremely important. All right, our next two, documentation procedures and physical controls. These are some of the easiest ones to understand. Documentation procedures is just where we record and maintain adequate evidence that the transactions have actually occurred, okay? So this essentially allows for transactions to be verified, which contributes to useful information for investors. This assists in the audit of the company records, right? So when you, say, sell something on a cash register, let's stick with the cash register example. When you sell something on a cash register, there is a receipt. Now, the customer gets a copy of the receipt, but there is also a copy of that receipt that is maintained, typically digitally these days, for the company's records, right? And so that's all that documentation procedures are, is just maintaining records of the transactions that happened. This does include the use of pre-numbering and reconciling. So if you're familiar with doing a bank reconciliation, that's a form of documentation control. If you're familiar with the fact that when companies write checks, those checks are pre-numbered. You've got check number 1, check number 2, check number 3. That is a documentation control. If the company sees that, hey, check number 1, 2, and 5 got processed, then the question arises, well, what happened to 3 and 4, right? It enables you to track what's going on with your assets. So that's documentation. Physical controls are exactly what you'd think about. So when it comes to something like cash, right, that you need to physically protect, use a safe, a vault, safety deposit boxes. When it comes to things like inventory that you have to physically protect, lock your warehouse, lock your storage room. When it comes to important physical paperwork that needs to be protected, put it in locked filing cabinets. If it's not physical, if it's digital records or facilities, make sure you've got passkeys, make sure you've got biometrics, something to physically keep someone out. Buildings and contents, alarms, security cameras, even your employees, physical time clocks for them to check in and out. All of these are considered physical controls to safeguard the assets and record keeping of the company. All right, that brings us to our last two. Independent internal verification. This is the review of one employee's work by another employee that is independent of that work. So again, sticking with my cash register example, you have the person working the register, and at the end of the shift, that person has a certain amount of money in the register. Now, That person has to hand that money off to a supervisor who is then going to count that money and make a record of it. But you don't want necessarily that supervisor to have the opportunity to steal from the register and then blame the employee or something of that nature. So a way you can avoid this is you can have the employee monitor the supervisor's counting of the money, or in a little bit more appropriate monitoring role, have the supervisor monitor as the employee counts their own money in front of them. Either way, it's a situation where you have one person monitoring the other person's work, and that provides an independent verification of what has actually transpired. Now, this can happen periodically. So in the case of like the cash register situation, that's something that's happening all the time at the end of each shift. Or it can happen on a surprise basis. This is a situation where the internal auditors of the company might actually come in and say, hey, we want to verify this set of records to make sure everything's smooth. And you may not have known it was coming, but they're going to do that work and perform that verification to make sure all the controls are operating as they should. So that's independent internal verification. Last up, human resources controls. So human resources controls involve bonding employees who handle cash. If you've never heard of the word bonding, that's just a way of basically taking out an insurance policy against that employee stealing the cash from you. Rotating employee duties. So rotating employee duties is a very interesting one because for people to recognize that there is an opportunity to commit fraud, they have to be in a role long enough to see the weaknesses of that role. And so by rotating employee duties and keeping everyone in a fresh role, you wind up taking away the chance for them to identify the weaknesses of those roles. Requiring employees to take vacations. This one is so interesting. You wouldn't think vacations are a control activity, but they are in the following sense. If someone is doing something wrong to defraud the company, that person, upon taking a vacation, has to let someone else perform their duties. And it's going to be really difficult to then hide the thing you were doing wrong when you have to give someone full access to do what you are supposed to be doing in your absence. When it comes to fraud investigations, a huge red flag is when you go into a company and you see that somebody doesn't take their vacations, like voluntarily doesn't take their vacations. Most employees love to get away from work. It's the employees that are doing something wrong and don't want someone snooping around what they're doing while they're gone that tend to avoid taking vacations. And then, of course, at the hiring process, conduct background checks, right? Make sure you're hiring trustworthy employees that you can trust not to defraud your company. So plenty of things you can do from a human resources aspect. So there you have it, 6 different types of control activities, all there to, in some way or another, protect the assets and the financial reporting of the company, be it physically, be it through human resources, be it through monitoring, be it through just how duties are assigned, so forth and so on. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you join me for another video.